There are a couple members of my family that are scuba certified. On this trip, it was my brother-in-law, two nephews, and myself. It was about 6.5 hours of driving, and the larger group that we went with rented out the entire Red Rider Resort. Right next to the campground is Lake Manuel, which we will actually be doing a night dive on in 2 days. Wake up the next morning, they provide breakfast for us, then we are going to head to the dive site, which is known as Shangri-La. This is a few miles outside of Crosby, Minnesota, and there's a little bit of off-roading you have to do in order to get to the dive site. One of the good things about this particular dive site is there's plenty of opportunities for divers of different skill sets. If you like hanging out in shallower waters and looking at the fish, there are plenty of fish to see between 15 and 30 feet. But if you enjoy the kiss of nitrogen narcosis, there is plenty of opportunities to go deep. With this being the first dive of the weekend, I used it to get my weight situated. I did not know that this sign was here or where the rope led. At this point, I'm at 72 feet, and according to my computer, I can stay here for 24 minutes without going into decompression. The rope ended at 96 feet. According to my computer, I can stay here for about 10 minutes before I would switch over into a decompression dive. I started the dive with 3,000 pounds of air. Now I'm down to about 1,500 pounds of air, which means I have about 1,000 pounds before I need to quit. And with that, I'm going to spend the rest of the dive at about 15 feet looking at the fish. Each dive, you'll run across different items, and on this particular one, the oddest thing I came across was a car. At 500 psi of air, I surfaced, and unfortunately, I had a little bit of a surface swim to get back to where I started. For the surface interval of about an hour and a half, going to get something to eat, get the tanks filled, then Sam is going to be my dive partner on this next one. We've got a long walk and a long surface swim over to the middle section of the lake, and we are going to do a dive called Stairway to Hell. We were given rough instructions on how to find the stairway. Once we found a certain rock underwater at 30 feet, we swam down to 70 feet and then started following the contour of the bank until we came across the staircase. And after swimming at 70 feet for about 5 minutes, we finally came across the staircase. The reason it's called Stairway to Hell is down at the bottom of this staircase, someone has placed a brass skull. At this point, we've been underwater for about 10 minutes, consumed roughly 1,000 pounds worth of air, and at this point, we could stay underwater for an additional 22 minutes before we would need to do a decompression dive. After looking at the skull, we don't have enough air to stay down there for 22 minutes, so we're going to follow the staircase back up to shallower waters. And so that we don't have a really long surface swim where the water's quite a bit warmer, we're going to make our way back to the entrance point. And we ran into a couple other divers that were from our group on the way back. One of the important rules of scuba diving, especially when you're surfacing, is never hold your breath. Make our way out through the maze, then we're going to head back to the campsite. Every 5 years, a scuba tank needs to be hydrostatically tested, and every year it needs to have a visual inspection done. And a colonel from LandShark Scuba was able to perform this visual inspection on site. The next morning we wake up, have breakfast, they have a dive briefing, then we get in our vehicles and we head to the dive site, which is Lake Louise. The roads are about the same as they were the day before, but eventually we were finally able to get to the dive site. And on this particular dive, we plan on going deeper than we were yesterday. And eventually, after we made it to the bottom, we were able to come across the sailboat. Shortly after visiting the sailboat, we saw the pirate ship. Then we decided to swim over to the mermaid and follow the pipe down to both Freddy and Jason. The warm temperature is closer to the surface. At about 20 feet, you'll hit the thermocline, and then everything else below that gets progressively colder. Down towards the bottom of the lake, it got down to 45 degrees. We stopped and hung out with Jason for a little bit. Freddy was about 10 feet below Jason. We didn't go down to see him because we wanted to spend some time looking for the shark cave. The shark cave's at about 95 feet, and nitrogen narcosis was definitely taking effect because I was unable to hold the camera steady the entire time. In here, we could see two sharks, a plastic skeleton, and a cow skull. From different people we've talked to, some people say the cave leads to another part of the lake, and other people I've talked to said the cave dead ends about 15 feet back. Being that neither Sam nor myself are cave certified, we are not going to enter the cave. At this point, I've been under the water for about 8 minutes, consumed about 1,300 pounds of air, and could stay down at this depth for an additional 14 minutes before I switch over into decompression. As we're ascending, I do need to vent some air out of my dry suit so that it does not overinflate and take me all the way to the surface. On the way back, I ran into my nephews, so I decided to take them over and show them the platform. As we were going up and doing our 15-foot safety stop, I decided to do a little bit of out-of-air training. For this, I gave up my primary air source and switched over to my backup. I have never had to use my spare air container for an actual emergency, but one time for training, I breathed on it from 90 feet all the way up to 15 feet, where I did a 2-minute safety stop before the tank ran out. With dive number 4 in the books, we're going to head back to the campground, get some supper, then prepare for a night dive. About an hour before the night dive, it started raining, which meant it was going to be a little bit colder. For me, that didn't matter. I was in a dry suit, but both my nephews were in a wetsuit, and they got a little chilled by the end of the evening. We only had to drive about 5 minutes to the parking lot of where we were going to do the night dive, get suited up, then we get to drag all of our gear down to the water, which was about a 200-foot march. For night diving, each diver is going to carry a tank light. This is either a glow light or a strobe that we strap to the diver, and they also need to carry a flashlight. Originally, there were 7 divers that started this dive. The original plan was for all 7 of us to stay together, but we quickly abandoned that plan and then split up into a group of 4, and then I took my 2 nephews. We were the group of 3 that went to the west. For safety reasons, you generally don't go very deep on night dives, but it's actually very peaceful to sit here and watch the fish. For night dives, we like to end with a little bit extra air, so we stop at 1,000 pounds as opposed to the normal 500 for normal scuba diving. With all of the divers being accounted for, we're going to gather up the gear and head back to the parking lot. It's a real quick dive from the parking lot back to the campground. We're going to offload the gear, go take a shower, then join the rest of the divers for some shenanigans. For 4 divers to do a 3-day trip, this is the amount of gear we had to carry with us. Now we have a 6.5-hour drive back to South Dakota. Besides going all the way to the ocean, where you've got crystal clear waters with warm temperatures, this is one of my favorite dive trips to do around here.